Chris Schultz here with Talk About Topeka at the Break Room in downtown Topeka, our live studio. On this segment, we have Tawny Stottlemire from Community Action. How are you, Tawny?
Wonderful.
Thanks
for
so
inviting
much for
me.
being here. I'm glad you could be here with us. Now, we talked a little bit on the phone about some of the issues that are facing our community, and I wanted you to be able to maybe paint a picture for our viewers of what poverty is looking like here locally.
Okay. Well, I'm here because Community Action fights poverty.
Yeah.
And we do that in a variety of different ways. So as I look at our community, I can give you, first of all, starting us off on a level playing field so that everybody's got some facts. When we talk about poverty, talking about Topeka, what we're really talking about this year is families that are living with a certain amount of income each year. That's how the federal government defines poverty. So for 2017, for a family of 4, we're talking about a household that's living with $24,000 or less every year. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, we're not only dealing with people in Topeka who literally are extremely poor and living in poverty, but also people who are making more than that perhaps in their household, but still struggling to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. So I like to lay that groundwork so that we're not just literally talking about the federal definition of poverty.
Yeah. Yeah.
In our area, we have about 13% of our population living in poverty, and that's the technical federal definition. Mm-hmm. If you look at people who are struggling day to day just to make ends meet, it's closer to 20% of the area's population. So that's a lot of people.
These are people who just don't have enough money at the end of the day to pay their bills, to put food on the table. Mm-hmm. They're struggling, they're working full-time jobs, and they just can't make it.
Most people who are receiving services and working and going through poverty programs are in fact working. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things when we talk about our community. The first thing I think that we need to do is help people stop judging and stop making assumptions about folks that are working and living in poverty, because most of our assumptions aren't actually true.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of outside factors that have, obviously affect poverty, but as far as locally here, how have we been seeing the trends of poverty?
Mm-hmm. So I told you that we have about 13% of our population actually in poverty, about 20% if you look at the broader need. Mm-hmm. As a state, we are at about 15, or as a nation, we're at about 15%. In our state, we're just slightly higher than Topeka at about 13.5%. So the city is doing fairly well. Comparatively, all right? But when you ask someone,
still too high.
Yeah, I mean, how much poverty is okay?
Yeah.
What are you willing to live with? 13% is still above anybody's scale of what they'd be willing to do. Locally, we're seeing concerns about affordable housing, and accessible, sustainable, affordable housing has been a big concern. Not enough resources for mental illness, which is also part of our poverty issue in the community. Transportation, it can be an issue for a lot of people who live in poverty. I thought this was interesting. In the last census, we learned that in our area, of the people who are working, about 1% of them take public transportation. But of low-income people who are working, 65% of them take public transportation.
Wow.
So that tells you that a majority of our public transportation riders are low-income people and people who are going to work. So having that public transportation go to places that people need it to go to get to their jobs.
To go there.
Yes.
People have a variety of scheduled times as well.
Very important.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So how can John Q. Topekan, who's saying, I think that poverty, that we have too much poverty, how can I help? What can I do to get involved and make a difference?
As I said, the first thing I would encourage John Q. to do is avoid judgments, avoid falling into the myths, and get active, get out there, be involved with low-income people. Part of poverty doesn't have a cure. And there's no one cause of poverty. But we do know that successfully getting out of poverty involves surrounding yourself in a community of people. So actually getting involved, volunteering, either through community action or other programs that we've heard about on Talk About Topeka. There's plenty of us in the area working on the issue, but actually getting out there and getting involved. It takes money, and money doesn't solve the problem, so it also takes time and persistence and patience. And I can't tell you that just creating jobs will solve our problem or creating housing will solve our problem. We have to commit ourselves as a city very intentionally to addressing the issue of poverty. If we attempt to piecemeal it, we may make some progress, but we'll still be in the same place that we are today, 20 years from now.
And fighting poverty is also fighting crime. It's making our neighborhoods safer. It's easing a lot of anxiety. It's really doing good things for good people, and that's Topekans really do that. We want to do that. I think legitimately we have really good hearts. We just need to be able to know which way to point the car and which direction we're supposed to go in sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So really, get out and volunteer for organizations that are helping those in our most vulnerable residents. If you got extra money, write some checks. They definitely need the help. So get involved. That's really the key of this, right?
I think so, and then encourage our leaders to be intentional. There would be wonderful things that could happen if, say, the City Council and the County Commission would intentionally address poverty instead of individual issues. This is what we dedicate ourselves to as a city. In 15 years, we want to reduce the poverty rate that's now at 13% to 7%. Set a goal, make it intentional, and make sure that 90% of the things that we do in policy making address that issue. That would really help.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for all the work that you do every single day to fight poverty and spread the message around to those in our community of this important, very important issue. As we make Topeka the safest capital community in the country, we also want it to be comfortable for our residents, and that's what Community Action's doing. Thank you so much for doing that, Tawny.
So glad to be here. Thanks, Chris.
You bet. Thank you very much. Well, folks, that's Tawny Stottlemire with Community Action.